October 4th, 2025. A quiet Saturday afternoon in Tanzania. A man in a dark green uniform stands before a phone camera. His face is steady, his tone unshaken. He looks straight into the lens and says, "Your government is stealing from you. And if we don't stop them, this nation will collapse." In that moment, everything changes. Within minutes, his words explode across TikTok, WhatsApp, Instagram, flooding every phone in East Africa. His name is Captain John Charles Tesha, a weapons instructor in the Tanzania Air Force. And with one video, he does something that hasn't happened in Tanzania for 60 years. He calls on the military to overthrow the government on camera in uniform for the world to see. The government tries to erase the footage, but it's too late. Within hours, every server, every chat group, every phone carries the same question. Why would a decorated officer throw away his entire career, his family, his future for this? What could push a man that far? To understand his desperation, we must return to the beginning, to the day Tanzania lost the man they called the bulldozer and gained the woman the world thought would be different, President Samia Suluhu Hassan. A story of hope that became betrayal, of silence that became fear, and of a soldier who finally decided that silence was no longer an option. Because this is not just a Tanzanian story, it's a story about every nation where truth is punished and loyalty is bought. It's a warning about what happens when power forgets the people. Before you scroll away, ask yourself, if this happened in your country, would you stay silent or speak like Captain Tesha did? Please share this if you still believe truth should never be silenced. Subscribe if you believe Africa's awakening deserves to be heard. It began, as all tragedies do, with a death and a silence that followed. March 2021. Tanzania wakes up to the shocking news that President John Pombe Magufuli, the man they called the bulldozer, is dead. The government says it was heart failure. But for 18 long days before that announcement, the president had vanished. No public appearances, no statements, no farewell. Just rumors, fear, and confusion. When the nation finally heard the news, people wept openly. To some, Magufuli was a tyrant, a man who arrested journalists and silenced critics. But to millions, he was a patriot, the only leader who dared to stand up to the World Bank, renegotiate mining contracts, and shout Tanzania belongs to Tanzanians. He built roads, factories, schools. He showed up at government offices without warning, firing corrupt officials on live television. He was loved, hated, and feared in equal measure. But above all, he felt real. So when he died, something in Tanzania's spirit broke. 2 days later, a woman took the oath to replace him. Samia Suluhu Hassan, vice president turned national savior, the first woman to lead Tanzania, the first to lead any East African nation. The symbolism was powerful. The international media hailed her as a hero, a new dawn they called it. At first, it truly seemed so. She lifted media bans, released a few political prisoners, and acknowledged that COVID was real after her predecessor's denial. Diplomats smiled, investors returned. The world praised Tanzania's rebirth, but beneath the calm surface, a storm was brewing. Because Samia hadn't just inherited the presidency, she had inherited the system. That system has a name, CCM Chama cha Mapinduzi, the Party of the Revolution. It has ruled Tanzania since 1977, almost half a century. Every president, every parliament, every election, always CCM. The party once stood for unity and African socialism under Julius Nyerere, Tanzania's founding father. But over time, the ideals faded, the power remained. Today, CCM isn't a party. It's a machine fueled by money, loyalty, and fear. Around President Samia sat the same men who had served under every government: retired generals, former presidents, businessmen with mining and energy contracts. They had outlived reform after reform. They had no intention of letting a woman from Zanzibar undo what they built. And so Samia had a choice: to fight them and risk her presidency, or to walk with them and keep it. She chose power. By 2022, her early reforms slowed. By 2023, they stopped. By 2024, Tanzania was back to the same playbook: arrests, censorship, fear. Opposition rallies were banned. Journalists disappeared. The woman once celebrated for restoring freedom became its greatest threat. And yet for a while, the world kept applauding her. They saw the scarf, the calm tone, the soft-spoken composure, and mistook it for compassion. But on the streets of Dar es Salaam and Arusha, people whispered a different story. A story of phone calls that led to disappearances, of families afraid to ask questions, and of a government that ruled not by respect, but by silence. For Captain Tesha, a man trained to defend the Republic, silence was unbearable. He had seen the shift from service to submission, from nation to network, from leadership to loyalty. He watched a government once praised for progress become a cage for its own citizens. And as the 2025 election approached, with the ruling party poised to win 99% of the vote yet again, Tesha made his choice not out of ambition but out of despair. He looked at his country and saw a mirror of betrayal, the kind Magufuli had warned against, the kind that Samia had promised to end, the kind that every soldier swears to fight even if it means fighting their own government. That's where the real story of rebellion begins. The breaking point came in the summer of 2024, a year that would stain Tanzania's conscience forever. On August 11th, the police launched what they called a preventive operation. By nightfall, over 500 people were arrested: opposition leaders, youth organizers, journalists, even university students who had shared political memes. It wasn't just a crackdown, it was a message. We are watching. We control everything. Among the detained were Tundu Lissu, the opposition leader who had survived 16 bullets in 2017, Freeman Mbowe, his party chairman, and 5 journalists from independent media outlets. All were released within days, just long enough to remind the nation that freedom now came with an expiration date. Then the disappearances began. The Tanganyika Law Society. Tanzania's Bar Association documented 83 missing people within months: activists, party officials, ordinary citizens. Their names became whispered prayers. Dion Kipa, a young local organizer, vanished after receiving a phone call. Dayat Soa and Jacob Godwin, both from the youth wing of the opposition, last seen being pushed into an unmarked van. Frank Embus, a motorcycle taxi driver, wrong place, wrong time, gone without a trace. And then came the case that froze the nation. Ali Mohammed Kibao, a senior opposition member, was traveling by bus from Dar es Salaam to Tanga. He was taken in broad daylight in front of witnesses. 2 days later, fishermen found his body near the shore. He had been beaten, tortured, and burned with acid. That was the moment fear replaced speech. Activists deleted their posts. Families stopped asking questions. Radio hosts switched to playing music instead of news. In Tanzania, silence became survival. But even silence can't hold forever, because one day someone broke it, not with a speech, but with a cartoon. On September 20th, the newspaper The Citizen released a short animated video on its social media pages. It showed a woman who looked unmistakably like President Samia Suluhu Hassan sitting on a couch flipping TV channels. On every channel, real Tanzanian families appeared: mothers, fathers, children, holding photos of loved ones who had disappeared. At the end, the cartoon president looked annoyed, sighed, and changed the channel. Within hours, the video went viral. It captured what everyone was too afraid to say. The government's response was swift and brutal. The entire media company was suspended for 30 days, its newspapers, websites, TV, and social media accounts wiped offline. The official statement said the video harmed national unity and threatened peace. But everyone knew the truth. The only threat was the truth itself. For a moment, Tanzania held its breath. Would this finally wake the world up? Would the international community speak? But nothing happened. No sanctions, no condemnation. Just silence. Inside the country, a new kind of argument erupted, not about freedom, but about gender. Some said Samia was being unfairly attacked because she was a woman. Others shot back, this isn't about gender. A dictator is a dictator, male or female. The debate filled social media, radio talk shows, even church sermons. But while people argued about feminism and fairness, the real issue, the missing people, disappeared from the headlines. That's how propaganda wins. Not by convincing you it's right, but by distracting you from what's wrong. By the end of 2024, the regime had done the impossible. It made an entire nation afraid to think out loud. And somewhere inside a military base, Captain John Charles Tesha watched all of this unfold. He saw the arrests, the deaths, the silence. He saw his government crushing the very values he had sworn to defend. And he realized something most soldiers never admit, that loyalty, when given to the wrong cause, becomes betrayal. So he began recording himself. 2 hours, 1 camera, 1 soldier who had nothing left to lose. The man who would soon be called the Ibrahim Traoré of Tanzania pressed record and declared war not on his country, but on its corruption. By the dawn of 2025, Tanzania had changed not through law, but through fear. There were no gunshots in the streets, no tanks rolling through Dar es Salaam, but people had learned something more effective than violence: obedience. Teachers avoided political topics in class. Radio hosts stuck to love songs. Young people who once organized protests now traded memes in private group chats, their faces lit only by the glow of a phone screen in the dark. The nation wasn't living, it was waiting. And then came Tundu Lissu's trial. The opposition leader, once shot 16 times and left for dead, now stood accused of treason, his crime calling for electoral reforms. He didn't lead a rebellion. He didn't carry weapons. He simply said Tanzania's election system needed change. Under President Samia's government, that statement alone was enough for the death penalty. The trial began postponed, resumed, postponed again 5 times. Because in Tanzania's justice system, the waiting is the punishment. Keeping him in court meant keeping him out of politics. When international lawyers tried to help, the government responded as if the law itself were foreign interference. Kenyan attorney Martha Karua, activist Boniface Mwangi, Ugandan lawyer Agatha Atuhairwa, even Kenya's former Chief Justice Willy Mutunga, all detained and deported the moment they landed in Dar es Salaam. Their crime defending a man whose voice the regime had already decided must disappear. The message was unmistakable. Tanzania doesn't need witnesses. It needs silence. Across the country, ordinary citizens adapted to survive. They learned to look away when someone was taken. They deleted old tweets. They spoke in code. "The rain is heavy today" meant another activist was arrested. Fear had become a second language. But the silence cracked one more time, not through politics, but through grief. On October 18, 2025, just 2 weeks after Captain Tesha's viral video, John Manika, the deputy chairman of the opposition, tried to cross the Kenya-Tanzania border to attend the funeral of Raila Odinga, Kenya's longtime opposition leader and Pan-African icon. Immigration officials confiscated his passport without explanation. He began live streaming the incident. Within 3 hours, hundreds gathered outside the border post, Tanzanians and Kenyans standing shoulder to shoulder. No stones thrown, no violence. Just people with smartphones chanting, "Let him go." The crowd grew, cameras kept rolling, and 6 hours later the government quietly released him. That moment changed everything. For the first time, the people had seen that visibility is power, that when the world is watching, governments hesitate. And yet, even as hope flickered at the border, the political machinery in Dar es Salaam was preparing for something far darker: an election that had already been decided. The ruling CCM party printed its billboards, launched rallies, promised peace, but the main opposition leader was still in prison. The media was muzzled, and independent observers were blocked from entering the country. Analysts predicted the result before a single vote was cast: 99%. The same number the party won the year before, the same number it will claim again. For the people of Tanzania, that number no longer meant victory. It meant captivity, proof that democracy was now a stage play, and the actors no longer believed their own lines. Captain Tesha had seen all of this coming. That's why he spoke out. Because when elections become theater and justice becomes a weapon, the people's last defense is truth spoken loudly enough to be heard. From Washington to Brussels, the silence was deafening. As Tanzania slipped deeper into repression, the Western world looked away. Because for them, President Samia Suluhu Hassan was not a dictator, she was a symbol, a success story, a soft-spoken woman who smiled for cameras, spoke fluent diplomacy, and represented progress in a region too often led by men in uniforms. And in the world of public relations, symbols are worth more than truth. So when hundreds vanished and journalists disappeared, the international headlines didn't say Tanzania silences dissent. They said Tanzania's female leader continues reforms despite challenges. It's easier to sell the image of reform than to confront the reality of fear. American diplomats issued brief, cautious statements expressing concern but never condemnation. The U.S. Embassy in Dar es Salaam praised Tanzania's stability even as opposition figures were dragged from their homes. Behind the scenes, Western corporations still signed mining deals, and international donors released development funds without asking questions. Because Tanzania, like many African nations, sits on gold, both literally and politically. And stability, no matter how cruel, is better for business than change. Meanwhile, in Africa's heartland, another story was being written: a very different kind of leadership. In Burkina Faso, a young captain named Ibrahim Traoré was building a new kind of state, one defined not by gender or image, but by sovereignty. Where Western military bases were replaced by local industry and independence wasn't a slogan, it was policy. Across the continent, young people began whispering Tesha's name alongside Traoré's. The Ibrahim Traoré of Tanzania, a man who refused to trade loyalty for silence, a soldier who believed that protecting a nation sometimes means disobeying its rulers. Western media dismissed the comparison. But in WhatsApp groups, African podcasts, and diaspora forums across Atlanta, Paris, and Johannesburg, the conversation had already begun. What if Africa no longer needed permission to change? That question unsettled the powerful, because if a Tanzanian officer could defy his president on moral grounds, and if the people could protect one another using only their phones, then control itself was slipping. For Americans watching from afar, it may feel like another distant crisis, but for those who remember Vietnam, Iraq, or Watergate, the pattern feels familiar. Power justifies itself, media sanitizes it, and by the time the truth surfaces, it's already too late. Tanzania is not the first nation to fall into this quiet form of tyranny, and it won't be the last. But its story forces an uncomfortable question for the West. When do alliances built on stability become alliances with oppression? Because every time the United States applauds a leader while ignoring the people suffering beneath them, it teaches the world that human rights are negotiable and that silence is safer than justice. Captain Tesha's defiance reminds us that courage doesn't always look like war. Sometimes it looks like a man standing alone in front of a camera telling his country the truth. Night has fallen over Dar es Salaam. The streets are quiet now, too quiet. Billboards of President Samia Suluhu Hassan still glow above the highways, promising peace and progress. But beneath that light, the people walk faster, speak softer, and look over their shoulders before mentioning politics. For 60 years, Tanzania was the exception in East Africa, a country that escaped coups, civil wars, and foreign interventions. While neighbors burned, Tanzania endured. But now the fire is inside the house, invisible, silent, and spreading. This isn't the roar of war. It's the slow suffocation of democracy. No explosions, no body bags, just one van that never reaches its destination, one journalist who never comes home, one headline that never gets printed, and one soldier standing alone who finally says, "Enough." Captain John Charles Tesha may have vanished, but his words still echo in every corner of East Africa. Your government is stealing from you. If we don't stop them, this nation will collapse. Perhaps he was wrong to call for a coup, but perhaps he was right to call for courage. Because the real war isn't fought with guns, it's fought with memory. The moment a nation forgets tyranny wins. Across the continent, other leaders are listening. In Burkina Faso, Ibrahim Traoré speaks of sovereignty and truth. In Mali, in Niger, in the streets of Nairobi and Kampala, people are asking the same question. How long can silence protect the guilty? History will not remember Tanzania for the elections it staged, but for the voices it tried to erase. And history will not judge Samia Suluhu Hassan by her gender or her smile, but by what she did with power and what she allowed power to do to her people. There is an old Swahili proverb that says, "When the monkey's day to die comes, all the trees become slippery." It means that when fate approaches, even safety becomes illusion. And for Tanzania, that day may already be here. So the question is no longer about Captain Tesha or President Samia. It's about us, those who watch and choose between comfort and conscience. Will we scroll past injustice once again, or will we share the truth before the silence spreads too far? Please share this story if you believe that truth must never be censored. Subscribe if you stand with those who dare to speak, even when it costs them everything. Because history belongs not to the powerful, but to those who refuse to look away.